Copilot notebooks look like your new productivity savior. They're actually your next compliance nightmare. I realize that sounds dramatic, but it's not hyperbole, it's math. Every company that's tasted this shiny new toy is quietly building a governance problem large enough to earn its own cost center. Here's the pitch: a notebook's workspace that pulls together every relevant document, slide deck, spreadsheet, and email, then lets you chat with it like an omniscient assistant. At first, it feels like magic. Finally, your files have context. You ask a question, it draws in insights from across your entire organization and gives you intelligent synthesis. You feel powerful, productive, maybe even permanently promoted. The problem begins the moment you believe the illusion. You think you're chatting with a tool. You're actually training it to generate unauthorized composite data, text that sits in no compliance boundary, inherits no policy, and hides in no oversight system. Your Copilot answers might look harmless, but every output is a derivative document whose parentage is invisible. Think of that for a second. The most sophisticated summarization engine in the Microsoft ecosystem, producing text with no lineage tagging. It's not the AI response that's dangerous, it's the data trail it leaves behind, the breadcrumb network no one is indexing. To understand why notebooks are so risky, we need to start with what they actually are beneath the pretty interface. What Copilot notebooks actually are. A Copilot notebook isn't a single file. It's an aggregation layer, a temporary matrix that pulls data from sources like SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams chat threads, maybe even customer proposals your colleague buried in a subfolder 3 reorganizations ago. It doesn't copy those files directly. It references them through connectors that grant AI contextual access. The notebook is, in simple terms, a reference map wrapped around a conversation window. When users picture a notebook, they imagine a tidy Word document. Wrong. The notebook is a dynamic composition zone. Each prompt creates synthesized text derived from those references. Each revision updates that synthesis. And like any composite object, it lives in the cracks between systems. It's not fully SharePoint. It's not your personal OneDrive. It's an AI workspace built on ephemeral logic. What you see is AI construction, not human authorship. Think of it like giving Copilot the master key to all your filing cabinets, asking it to read everything, summarize it, and hand you back a neat briefing, then calling that briefing yours. Technically it is. Legally and ethically, that's blurrier. The brilliance of this structure is hard to overstate. Teams can instantly generate campaign recaps, customer updates, solution drafts, no manual hunting. Ideation becomes effortless. You query everything you've ever worked on and get an elegantly phrased response in seconds. The system feels alive, responsive, almost psychic. The trouble hides in that intelligence. Every time Copilot fuses 2 or 3 documents, it's forming a new data artifact. That artifact belongs nowhere. It doesn't inherit the sensitivity label from the HR record it summarized, the retention rule from the finance sheet it cited, or the metadata tags from the PowerPoint it interpreted. Yet all of that information lives invisibly inside its sentences. So each notebook session becomes a small generator of derived content, fragments that read like harmless notes but imply restricted source material. Your AI-powered convenience quietly becomes a compliance centrifuge, spinning regulated data into unregulated text. To a user, the experience feels efficient. To an auditor, it looks combustible. Now, that's what the user sees. But what happens under the surface, where storage and policy live, is where governance quietly breaks. The moment governance breaks. Here's the part everyone misses. The notebook's intelligence doesn't just read your documents, it rewrites your governance logic. The moment Copilot synthesizes cross-silo information, the connection between data and its protective wrapper snaps. Think of a sensitivity label as a seatbelt. You can unbuckle it by stepping into a notebook. When you ask Copilot to summarize HR performance, it might pull from payroll, performance reviews, and an internal survey in SharePoint. The output text looks like a neat paragraph about team engagement trends, but buried inside those sentences are attributes from 3 different policy scopes. Finance data obeys one retention schedule, HR data another. In the notebook, those distinctions collapse into mush. Purview, the compliance radar Microsoft built to spot risky content, can't properly see that mush because the notebook's workspace acts as a transient surface. It's not a file, it's a conversation layer. Purview scans files, not contexts, and therefore misses half the derivatives users generate during productive sessions. Data loss prevention, or DLP, has the same blindness. DLP rules trigger when someone downloads or emails a labeled file, not when AI rephrases that file's content and spit shines it into something plausible but policy-free. It's like photocopying a stack of confidential folders into a new binder and expecting the paper itself to remember which pages were top secret. It won't. The classification metadata lives in the originals. The copy is born naked. Now imagine the user forwarding that AI-crafted summary to a colleague who wasn't cleared for the source data. There's no alert, no label, no retention tag, just text that feels safe because it came from Copilot. Multiply that by a whole department, and congratulations. You have a shadow data lake, a collection of derivative insights nobody has mapped, indexed, or secured. The shadow data lake sounds dramatic, but it's mundane. Each notebook persists as cached context in the Copilot system. Some of those contexts linger in the user's Microsoft 365 cloud cache, others surface in exported documents or pasted Teams posts. Suddenly your compliance boundary has fractal edges, too fine for traditional governance to trace. And then comes the existential question, who owns that lake? The user who initiated the notebook, their manager who approved the project, the tenant admin, Microsoft? Everyone assumes it's in the cloud somewhere, which is organizational shorthand for not my problem. Except it is, because regulators won't subpoena the cloud, they'll subpoena you. Here's the irony. Copilot works within Microsoft's own security parameters. Access control, encryption, and tenant isolation still apply. What breaks is inheritance. Governance assumes content lineage, AI assumes conceptual relevance. Those two logics are incompatible. So while your structure remains technically secure, it becomes legally incoherent. Once you recognize that each notebook is a compliance orphan, you start asking the unpopular question, who's responsible for raising it? The answer predictably is nobody, until audit season arrives and you discover your orphan has been very busy reproducing. Now that we've acknowledged the birth of the problem, let's follow it as it grows up into the broader crisis of data lineage. The data lineage and compliance crisis. Data lineage is the genealogy of information, who created it, how it mutated, and what authority governs it. Compliance depends on that genealogy. Lose it, and every policy built on it collapses like a family tree written on a napkin. When Copilot builds a notebook summary, it doesn't just remix data, it vaporizes the family tree. The AI produces sentences that express conclusions sourced from dozens of files, yet it doesn't embed citation metadata. To a compliance officer, that's an unidentified adoptive child. Who were its parents? HR? Finance? A file from legal dated last summer? Copilot shrugs. Its job was understanding, not remembering. Record-keeping thrives on provenance. Every retention rule, every right-to-be-forgotten request, every audit trail assumes you can trace insight back to origin. Notebooks sever that trace. If a customer requests deletion of their personal data, GDPR demands you verify purging in all derivative storage. But notebooks blur what counts as storage. The content isn't technically stored, it's synthesized. Yet pieces of that synthesis re-enter stored environments when users copy, paste, export, or reference them elsewhere. The regulatory perimeter becomes a circle drawn in mist. Picture an analyst asking Copilot to summarize a revenue impact report that referenced credit card statistics under PCI compliance. The AI generates a paragraph, retail growth driven by premium card users. No numbers, no names, so it looks benign. That summary ends up in a sales pitch deck. Congratulations, sensitive financial data has just been laundered through an innocent sentence. The origin evaporates, but the obligation remains. Some defenders insist notebooks are temporary scratch pads. Theoretically, that's true. Practically, users never treat them that way. They export answers to Word, email them, staple them into project charters. The scratchpad becomes the published copy. Every time that happens, the derivative data reproduces. Each reproduction inherits none of the original restrictions, making enforcement impossible downstream. Try auditing that mess. You can't tag what you can't trace. Purview's catalog lists the source documents neatly, but the notebook's offspring appear nowhere. Version control? Irrelevant. There's no version record because the AI overwrote itself conversationally. Your audit log shows a single session ID, not the data fusion it performed inside. From a compliance standpoint, it's like reviewing CCTV footage that only captured the doorway, never what happened inside the room. Here's the counterintuitive twist. The better Copilot becomes, the worse this gets. As the model learns to merge context semantically, it pulls more precise fragments from more sources, producing output that is more accurate but less traceable. Precision inversely correlates with auditability. The sharper the summary, the fainter its lineage. Think of quoting classified intelligence during a water cooler chat. You paraphrase it just enough to sound clever, then forget that technically you just leaked state secrets. That's how notebooks behave. Quoting classified insight in colloquial form. Without metadata inheritance, compliance tooling has nothing to grip. You can't prove retention, deletion, or authorization. In effect, your enterprise creates hundreds of tiny amnesiac documents, each confident in its own authority, none aware of its origin story. Multiply by months, and you've replaced structured record-keeping with conversational entropy. Regulators don't care that the data was synthesized by AI. They'll treat it as any other uncontrolled derivative, and internal policies are equally unforgiving. If retention fails to propagate, someone signs an attestation that becomes incorrect the moment a notebook summary escapes its bounds. So the lineage issue isn't philosophical, it's quantifiable liability. Governance relies on knowing how something came to exist. Copilot knows that it exists, not from where. That single difference turns compliance reporting into guesswork. The velocity of notebooks ensures the guesswork compounds. Each new conversation references older derivatives, your orphan data raising new orphans. Before long, entire internal reports are built on untraceable DNA. If the architecture and behavior manifest governance chaos, the next logical question is, can you govern chaos deliberately? Spoiler, you can, but only if you admit it's chaos first. That's where we go next. How to regain control. Let's rephrase the chaos into procedure. The only cure for derivative entropy is deliberate governance. Rules that treat AI output as first-class data, not disposable conversation. You can't prevent Copilot from generating summaries any more than you can stop employees from thinking. But you can shape how those thoughts are captured, labeled, and retired before they metastasize into compliance gaps. Start with the simplest safeguard. Default sensitivity labeling on every notebook output. The rule should be automatic, tenant-wide, and impossible to opt out of. When a user spawns a notebook, the first line of policy says, any content derived here inherits the highest sensitivity of its sources. That approach may feel conservative, it is, but governance always errs on the side of paranoia. Better to overprotect one brainstorming session than defend a subpoena where you must prove an unlabeled summary was harmless. Next, monitor usage through Purview audit logs. Yes, most administrators assume Purview only tracks structured files. It doesn't have to. You can extend telemetry by correlating notebook activity events, session created, query executed, output shared with DLP alerts. If a user repeatedly exports notebook responses and emails them outside the tenant, you have early warning of a shadow lake expanding. In other words, pair Copilot's productivity metrics with your compliance dashboards. It's not surveillance, it's hygiene. Restrict sharing by design. A notebook should behave like a restricted lab, not a cafeteria. Limit external collaboration groups, disable public sharing links, and bind each notebook to an owner role with explicit retention authority. That owner becomes responsible for lifecycle enforcement, versioning, archiving, and deletion at project close. Treat the notebook container as transient. Its purpose is discovery, not knowledge storage. Now, introduce a new concept your compliance team will eventually adore. Derived data policies. Traditional governance stops at the document level. Derived data takes aim at the offspring. These are policies that define obligations for synthesized content itself. For example, AI-generated summaries must inherit data classification tags from parent inputs if confidence above 60%. That sounds technical because it is. You're requiring the AI to surface lineage in metadata form. Whether Microsoft exposes those hooks now or later, design your policy frameworks assuming they will exist, future-proofing your bureaucracy. Lifecycle management follows naturally. Each notebook should have an expiration date, 30, 60, or 90 days by default. When that date arrives, output either graduates into a governed document library or is lawfully forgotten. No in-between. If users need to revisit the synthesis, they must rehydrate it from governed sources. The rule reinforces context freshness and truncates lingering exposure. Pair expiration with version history. Even scratch spaces deserve audit trails. A notebook container without logs is a sandbox without fences. Let's pivot from policy ideals to human behavior because every compliance breach begins with optimism. Stories help. One enterprise, large international, very proud of its maturity model, discovered that a Copilot notebook summarizing bid data had accidentally leaked into vendor correspondence. The notebook pulled fragments from archived contract proposals that were never meant to see daylight again. Why? Retention didn't propagate. The AI summary included paraphrased win-loss metrics, and an enthusiastic analyst pasted them into an external email, unaware the numbers traced back to restricted archives. It wasn't espionage, it was interface convenience. Governance failed quietly because nobody thought synthetic text needed supervision. That incident produced a new cultural mantra. If Copilot wrote it, classify it. It sounds blunt, but clarity beats complexity. The company now labels every Copilot-generated paragraph as confidential until manually reviewed. They build conditional access rules that block sharing until content reviewers certify the derivative is safe. It slows workflow slightly, but compared to breach cost, it's negligible. The next layer of defense isn't technology, it's conversation. Bring it, compliance and business units together to define governance boundaries. Too often, every department assumes the others are handling AI oversight. The result? Nobody does. Form a cross-functional council that decides which datasets can legally feed Copilot notebooks, how summaries are stored, and when deletion becomes mandatory. The same meeting should define remediation protocols for existing orphan notebooks, run purview scans, classify outputs manually, archive or purge. At an operational level, the process resembles environmental cleanup. You identify contamination, discover, analyze its origin, classify, contain the spill, restrict access, and enforce remediation, delete or reclassify. The rhythm, discover, classify, contain, enforce, translates perfectly into Copilot governance. You're not punishing innovation, you're building waste management for digital runoff. There's also a cultural trick that works better than any policy binder. Anthropomorphize your AI. Treat Copilot like an overeager intern. Brilliant at digesting information, terrible at discretion. You'd never let an intern email clients unsupervised or store confidential notes on a USB stick. Apply the same instinct here. Before sharing a notebook output, ask, would I send this if an intern wrote it? If the answer is no, label it or delete it. Revisit training materials to emphasize that generative convenience doesn't neutralize responsibility. Every AI summary is a drafted record. Remind users that temporary doesn't mean exempt. Push this awareness through onboarding, internal newsletters, even casual team briefings. Governance isn't just technology, it's etiquette encoded into routines. If you're wondering when all this becomes automatic, you're not alone. Microsoft's roadmap hints that future Purview releases will natively ingest Copilot artifacts for classification and retention control. But until those APIs mature, the manual approach, naming conventions, periodic audits, and cross-department accountability remains mandatory. Think of your enterprise as writing the precedent before the law exists. Voluntary discipline today becomes regulatory compliance tomorrow. And yes, this governance work costs time, but disorder collects compound interest. Every unlabeled notebook is a liability accruing silently in your cloud. You either pay up early with structure or later with lawyers. Your choice, though, one of them bills by the hour. Control isn't optional anymore. AI governance isn't an abstraction, it's infrastructure. Without it, intelligent productivity becomes an intelligent liability. Let's zoom out and confront the ecosystem issue. The accelerating gap between how fast AI evolves and how slowly compliance catches up. The future of AI governance in M365. Governance always evolves slower than innovation. It's not because compliance officers lack imagination, it's because technology keeps moving the goalpost before the paint dries. Copilot notebooks are another case study in that phenomenon. Microsoft, to its credit, is already hinting at an expanded Purview framework that can ingest AI-generated artifacts, label them dynamically, and even trace the source fragments behind each synthesized answer. It's coming, but not fast enough for the enterprises already swimming in derivative content. Microsoft's strategy is fairly predictable. First comes visibility, then control, then automation. Expect Copilot's future integration with Purview to include semantic indexing, AI reading AI, scanning your generated summaries to detect sensitive data adrift in plain language. That indexing could classify synthesized text based not on file lineage, but on semantic fingerprinting, patterns of finance data, regulated terms, or PII expressions recognized contextually. Essentially compliance that reads comprehension rather than metadata. Audit logs will follow. The current logs show who opened a notebook and when. Future ones will likely show what the AI referenced, how it synthesized, and which sensitive elements it might have inherited. Imagine a compliance dashboard where you can trace an AI sentence back to its contributing documents the same way version history traces edits in SharePoint. That's the dream, a fully auditable semantic chain. When that arrives, governance finally graduates from forensic to proactive. Now I can already hear the sigh of relief from risk teams. Good, Microsoft will handle it. Incorrect. Microsoft will enable it. You will still own it. Governance doesn't outsource well. Every control surface they release needs configuration, tuning, and crucially interpretation. A mislabeled keyword or an overzealous retention trigger can cripple productivity faster than a breach ever could. This is where enterprises discover the asymmetry between platform features and organizational discipline. Tools don't govern, people do. And yet, some optimism is warranted. Dependency on cloud architecture has forced Microsoft to adopt a shared responsibility model. Security is theirs, compliance is yours. With Copilot artifacts, expect that division to sharpen. You'll get APIs to export audit data, connectors to pull notebook metadata into Purview, and policy maps linking AI containers to business units. What you won't get is an automatic conscience. The tools can detect risk patterns, they can't decide acceptable risk tolerance. The fascinating part is philosophical. Knowledge work now produces metadata faster than humans can label it. Every sentence your AI writes becomes both content and context, a self-documenting concept that mutates with use. The distinction between record and commentary dissolves. That makes the compliance challenge not metaphorical but ontological. What is a document when the author is probabilistic? Traditional filing systems expected discrete artifacts, this report, that file. AI erases those edges. Instead, you govern flows of knowledge, not fixed outputs. In that world, Purview and DLP will evolve from file scanners to contextual interpreters, compliance engines that score risk continuously, the way antivirus scans for behavioral anomalies. The control won't happen post-creation, it will happen mid-conversation. Policies will execute while you type, not after you save. Ironic, isn't it? The safer AI becomes at preventing leaks, the more dangerous its unmanaged byproducts grow. Guardrails reduce immediate exposure but multiply the debris of derivative data behind the scenes. Safer input leads to riskier shadow output. It's like building a smarter dam. The water doesn't disappear, it just finds smaller cracks. To fix that, enterprises will establish something resembling an AI registry. A catalog of generated materials automatically logged at creation. Each Copilot session could deposit a record into this registry: prompt, data sources, sensitivity tags, retention date. Think of it as a digital birth certificate for every AI sentence. The registry wouldn't judge the content, it would prove existence and lineage so governance can follow. This is where the ecosystem heads, AI writing entries into a secondary system documenting itself. Governance becomes recursive, artificial intellect producing compliance metadata about its own behavior. Slightly terrifying, yes, but also the only scalable model. Humans can't possibly index every conversation. Algorithms will have to regulate their own progeny. So the moral arc bends toward visibility. What began as transparent productivity will require transparent accountability. In the end, AI governance in M365 won't be about building fences around machines, it'll be about teaching them to clean up after themselves. Beautiful tools, as always, leave terrible messes when no one asks who holds the mop. The real risk isn't the feature, it's the complacency. Copilot notebooks aren't villains, they're mirrors, showing how eagerly organizations trade traceability for convenience. Each elegant summary disguises a silent transfer of accountability, from systems that documented to systems that merely remembered. The warning is simple. Every AI-generated insight is a compliance artifact waiting to mature into liability. The technology doesn't rebel, it obeys the parameters you forgot to define. You can't regulate what you refuse to acknowledge, and pretending temporary workspaces don't count is the digital equivalent of sweeping filings under the server rack. Complacency is the accelerant. Companies got burned by Teams sprawl, by SharePoint drives that became digital hoarding facilities, by Power BI dashboards nobody secured properly. Notebooks repeat the pattern with better grammar. The novelty hides the repetition. The fix isn't fear, it's forethought. Build the rules before regulators do. Mandate labels, audit usage, teach people that AI convenience doesn't mean moral outsourcing. Governance isn't a wet blanket over innovation, it's the scaffolding that keeps progress from collapsing under its own cleverness. Productivity used to mean saving time, now it has to mean saving evidence. The quicker your organization defines notebook policies, how creations are stored, tracked, and retired, the less cleanup you'll face when inspectors, auditors, or litigators start asking where the AI found its inspiration. So audit those notebooks, map that shadow data lake while it's still knee-deep. And if this breakdown saved you a future compliance headache, you know what to do. Subscribe, stay alert, and maybe note who's holding the mop. Efficiency is easy, accountability is optional only once.